moderators for today's event. Both worked on the book as researchers and both work at Kenna Partners in Nigeria. I'm pleased to introduce you to Chinonye Nnaji, an associate at Kenna Partners, and Oke Equinya, an associate director at Kenna Partners. Chinonye, over to you.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Really good to have everyone here. This is something that has been in the works for quite some time, and we're delighted to finally launch the book. I was honored to have also worked as a research assistant on the book, and I can tell you that it's been quite an interesting and enlightening journey. So we hope that we don't take so much of your time, but that we're able to give you some insights into the book and also insights in corporate governance generally and things that we should consider at time is. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. Just hand over to Elise just to say welcome words as well.
Good afternoon, guests, the learned authors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me add my voice to Ernst and Chinonye's welcome to all of you. Thank you also very much for making time out of your undoubtedly very busy schedules to join the authors, Professor Mervyn King, Senior Counsel, and Professor Fabian Ajogu, SAN, for the launch of their book, Outcomes-Based Governance, a Modern Approach to Corporate Governance. Now, as previously introduced, my name is Okechukwu Ekwanya. Normally, everyone just calls me Oke. And it's a profound honor for me, alongside my colleague and co-moderator, Ms. Chinonye Nnaji, to present this book, to moderate this event. It's great to see Chinonye and all of you, what with working remotely due to COVID-19. At this juncture, most respectfully request that we all say a short silent prayer for all those who have lost their lives and been otherwise adversely affected by the coronavirus pandemic currently ravaging the world. We would also like to pay tribute to the millions of healthcare workers all over the world who have worked tirelessly on the front lines battling this disease, and many of whom have made supreme sacrifice. We say thank you for service. Now, also the business of the day, the book Outcomes-Based Governance, a Modern Approach to Corporate Governance. This corporate governance is a topic whose importance in today's economically intertwined world we cannot overemphasize. We all witnessed the near chaos engendered by the 2008 global financial crisis, as well as collapses of major institutions like Enron and Arthur Andersen, among others. And at the heart of all of these catastrophes was one central issue: the failure of corporate governance. These events all illustrated the importance of corporate governance. Now, onto the book. This book essentially is moving towards a more innovative approach of corporate governance. This is what this book seeks to demystify and deconstruct the average reader. It is my strong conviction that this book will be useful to all categories of reader, from the CEO to the lecturer, from the students to the government regulator. It will be useful in developing future policy direction and in unpacking the relevant issues in corporate governance. It is written in simple, relatable language with real-world examples. And in the authors, you have two of the most renowned experts in the field of corporate governance, rightly recognized for their leading work in shaping codes of corporate governance and advising governments and corporations in multiple jurisdictions on good corporate governance practices. They are titans of the legal profession and of corporate governance. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure and honor to read out the profile of the first speaker, Professor Mervyn King, Senior Counsel. Now, Professor Mervyn King is a senior counsel, a former judge of the Supreme Court of South Africa, and former judge at the International Chamber of Commerce's International Court of Arbitration in Paris. He was the first president of the Commonwealth Association of Corporate Governance and a former governor of the International Corporate Governance Network. He is chairman emeritus of the Global Reporting Initiative, chairman emeritus of the International Integrated Reporting Council, and chairman emeritus of the King Committee on Corporate Governance that birthed the revolutionary King IV Code, which introduced an outcomes-based approach to corporate governance in South Africa. He is currently a member of the Private Sector Advisory Group to the World Bank on Corporate Governance and was a member of the International Advisory Boards of Stern Stewart, Tomorrow's Company, and the Central European Corporate Governance Association. Professor King SC chairs the Asian Center of Corporate Governance and was the chair of the United Nations Committee on Governance and Oversight. He is an honorary fellow of several businesses and accounting organizations and holds honorary doctorates from universities in South Africa, the UK, and Australia. He has acted as Inspector of Companies and the Commissioner of Inquiries into the Affairs of Companies. He has chaired many meetings for the compromise of creditors and companies and the rearrangement of shareholders' interests. He has spoken at conferences and lectured on corporate issues in 60 countries. Professor King SC is a regular speaker on radio and television talk shows and ran his own television series, King on Governance. He now sits as an arbitrator and mediator and is a founding member of the Arbitration Foundation of Southern Africa. It gives me great pleasure also now to hand over to Donné Hurst to read the profile of Professor Fabian Ajogwu, SAN. Thank you.
Donné, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Professor Fabian Ajogwu is a senior advocate of Nigeria with Kenna Partners and a Lagos Business School professor of corporate governance. He's an alumni of said business school, Oxford University, and an alumni of Lagos Business School. Professor Ajogwu holds a doctorate degree in law from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, an MBA from the IESE Business School, University of Navarra, Barcelona, and law degrees from the University of Nigeria and University of Lagos. He serves on the boards of Navari Group in Nigeria, ARM Harith Infrastructure, NES Global, Stanbic IBTC Holdings, and Guinness, Nigeria. He has served as an honorary counsel to the State of Israel and the Republic of South Africa. Professor Ajogwu assisted with the Securities and Exchange Commission in drafting Nigeria's pioneer code of corporate governance. He chaired the Nigerian Communications Commission Committee on Corporate Governance and served on the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria's Committee on the 2018 National Code of Corporate Governance. Professor Ajogwu is a fellow of the Society of Corporate Governance Nigeria, Nigeria Institute Chartered Arbitrators, African Leadership Initiative West Africa, Henry Crown Global Leadership of Aspen Institute, and AIFA Reading Society. He also serves on the board of the Lagos Court of Arbitration, the governing council of the Nigerian Institute of Chartered Arbitrators. He served on the governing council of Pan Atlantic University, Lagos Business School, the General Counsel of the Bar, and the Council of Legal Education, Nigerian Law School, as a statutory referred distinguished legal author, and serves as chairman of the body of the Senior Advocates of Nigeria Subcommittee of Continuing Legal Education. He is a member of the London Court of International Arbitration, Lagos Court Arbitration, and the International Council for Commercial Arbitration. I now hand over to Professor Ajogwu to introduce Professor King. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Donné and Chinoye, for those generous introductions. I see today, and it's with profound humility that I welcome all who have joined this virtual book presentation. And I see a lot of our colleagues, senior members of the bar, senior advocates of Nigeria, a lot of judges and justices of the appellate courts, and a good number of friends and colleagues and family on the virtual presentation. Well, for me, this is, I guess for many, the first time you're having a virtual book presentation. I think there's a lot to learn. We had planned to do this a while ago, May 7th in Johannesburg, and May 14th in Lagos. And we're all supposed to travel both ways. But then COVID had a different plan altogether, and we're working with that plan, hence this virtual platform. So I will be inviting, not to the podium now, but to the green rectangular enhancement on the screen, which we know that that's the speaker, a very distinguished and highly respected gentleman, who, by the way, told me only yesterday that ties are now out of fashion. And with COVID and working from home, we should try not to put on ties. But Professor Mervyn King is a distinguished learned silk, as we say within the Commonwealth, senior counsel, and served at the highest court of Africa, judge of the Supreme Court. The professor has done so much, King 1, 2, 3 to King 4, and so many other serious works on corporate governance that has formed the basis for companies modeling their behavior to ensure stakeholder returns on a broad-based level. I have very great admiration for my co-author, and it gives me pleasure to introduce him, as he's already very well known, present him to the audience, and the audience is about 158 very respected persons at this point. Introduce him to make some remarks. In this book presentation, we'll try to do it slightly differently. You will hear directly from the horse's mouth, from the authors, and then, of course, all who have worked together to bring this book to being presently with you. So Professor King, he's asked me repeatedly to call him Mervyn, but then I craved his indulgence that today there are many reasons why I would not just call him by that name. First, we're Africans, and people would wonder why I call an 83-year-old man by his name, first name. Secondly, we have a lot of lawyers in this platform. They will wonder why I have departed from some of the traditions of the bar, where we value seniority and respect. And of course, there are judges on this forum who might shudder and be frightened to see me call whom I'd refer to as my lord, just by his first name. So Professor King, you'll pardon me to skip your first name today. We will continue with that afterwards, but I invite you to give the remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Jogbu. Fabian, thank you. I want to make a few remarks about corporate governance. Firstly, it's a dynamic issue. It's not static. Once a code is written, it doesn't become the law of the Medes and Persians that altereth not. It will alter because of global events, corporate scandals, leaders not being conscious corporate leaders. And we know that the second half of the 19th century and the whole of the 20th century, leading into the 21st century, was based on a governance platform of the primacy of the shareholder. The primacy of the shareholder meant the shareholder was the most important of all the stakeholders. And some directors believed, and it became the platform on which governance developed through the 20th century, excuse me, underscored by the dissertation of Professor Milton Friedman, for which he got a laureate prize. And I paraphrase, that the sole purpose of the company is to make profit without deception. The consequence of that was throughout the 20th century, companies made profit. But the question was, how did the company make that profit? That was never asked in the 20th century. What was asked as a measurement of success was increased profit, increased dividends, and increased share price for the companies that were listed. If those three criteria were met, then the company was successful. The first writing of governance of the company, notwithstanding that the concept of limited liability started in the middle of the 19th century, as we know it today, was in 1990 when Sir Adrian Cadbury in England was asked, and this was his remit precisely, for the learned lawyers present, the ipsissima verba, the financial aspects of governance. That was his remit. Notice the accentuation on the financial aspects. So we were still busy with the financial capital model of the primacy of the shareholder. But in the 1970s was the third industrial revolution was in full flow. And that was research in the computer age. And this expedited research. And it led between 95 and 1997 to the conclusion that we'd reached ecological overshoot, which means, in clear language, that in the main companies, we're using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. Clearly not a sustainable matter. A survey also, through expedited research of computers, of the great stock exchanges in the world, and the best example to me was the S&P 500, where iconic companies were listed, showed that the makeup of their market capitalization, namely the number of shares in issue times the market price on that stock exchange, showed that only about 20% of the market cap was represented as additives in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards. What was this other 80%? It started to be named as non-financial assets. They were really sustainability issues in this extraordinary situation we'd reached because of unsustainable development throughout the 20th century, which led to a meeting at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva of the International Federation of Accountants, with me chairing the United Nations on governance and then chair of the Global Reporting Initiative, the first body to start sustainability reporting guidelines, now standards. And at that meeting in about 2009 it was Chatham House rules. There were institutional bodies such as the World Bank there, IOSCO, etc. And the president and chief executive said effectively, and I paraphrase, that financial reporting is still critical, but it's clear, having regard to the makeup of the market capitalization of companies, that it's no longer critical. It's critical, but no longer sufficient to discharge the duty of accountability, because the director is only reporting on 20% of value. I, as chairman of the GRI, said, well, sustainability reporting is becoming more and more important, but without the numbers is quite meaningless. I went on to say that companies are now starting to report in two silos: financial report according to financial reporting standards, and a sustainability report dealing with environmental, social, and governance issues. And the financial reports had become incomprehensible. And of course, they were historic, things that had already happened. There was a mass of information through the internet coming into companies on the ESG issues. And directors had to sort out this massive information and decide what was pertinent to the business of the company to report under these new sustainability guidelines. Well, I suggested that there should be an integration of these financial issues and the non-financial issues. What I said was that we need to have reporting in clear, concise, and understandable language. And these reports, the board needs to spend more time understanding them and extracting the material matter and putting it in clear, concise, and understandable language so that the average stakeholder could understand it. It must be a basic premise of accountability that you're reporting in an understandable manner. And we as directors were not. And so this led to the formation of the International Integrated Reporting Council, which was launched at St. James's Palace in London. And I became the chairman of the IIRC. It took us 2 years working with iconic companies and professionals in over 40 countries to eventually in December 2013, to release the Integrated Reporting Framework, which was the inputs of 5 resources: financial, manufactured, human, intellectual, natural, and social, the relationships between the company and its stakeholders. And you had all these inputs in the activities of the company producing its product or rendering its service. And this had outcomes once the product went out into society. So reporting became outcomes-based. In 2015, 193 governments, including the South African and Nigerian governments, agreed at the United Nations to the Sustainable Development Goals. And those were outcomes-based: clean water, clean cities, with the 17th one being collaboration. Well, I asked the question of my committee, the King Committee, if reporting is outcomes-based, if 193 governments have agreed on certain goals to be achieved by 2030, otherwise we might not have a habitable planet by the end of the century, shouldn't governance be outcomes-based? And we started discussing the question and trying to seek answer to this question. What were the outcomes of any organization, notice the generic word, of how a governing body had governed, which would lead stakeholders, both external and internal, to the reasonable conclusion that this organization had been practicing quality governance? We concluded that there were 4 outcomes. The first was value creation instead of profit, value creation in a sustainable manner in our resource-constrained world. Ethical culture with effective leadership, meaning that our directors had to accept that they were the conscience of the company, because the company is an artificial, incapacitated person that has no heart, mind, or conscience of its own. The third one was adequate and effective controls internal, with the board having informed oversight over management's proposals and management's conduct. And then, what was the trust and confidence of the community in which the company operated, with legitimacy of operations? So that is at the core of the King IV report, an outcomes-based approach, which Fabian and I have subtitled A Modern Approach to Corporate Governance. But it fits in with the reporting model and the sustainable goals, hopefully, which we will achieve by 2030. Now, of course, we have the problem of the pandemic, but with the foresight and hopefulness of achieving that, so we have a habitable planet by the end of the century. But I end how I started, that governance is a dynamic issue. Since Fabian and I have concluded this book, there are several things that have happened which are worth noting about governance. First of all, there are 2 major standards of sustainability reporting: the Global Reporting Initiative, for which I'm now Chairman Emeritus, and the Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board of America, focusing on specific guidance for specific industries rather than general sustainability issues. And through the Corporate Reporting Dialogue, inter alia, established at the IRC, we've got these 2 great international bodies talking, and they're speaking about collaboration and convergence. And with a timetable of about 12 months from now, we will have 1 standard of sustainability reporting, which starts ridding directors with the clutter and confusion which standards should we apply? The second thing which has happened, I wrote 5 years ago that to call an accountant who deals with the financial matters in a value creation process where there could be value erosion because the business model was such, or the strategy was, that how the company made its money was having such an adverse impact, for example, on the environment, that holistically, the company was actually destroying value for society. The critical issue was, how did the company make its money? And it was a value creation process from inputs to outcomes. And the true change maker I found in advising companies in C-suites was and is the accountant, because of his or her training of public interest issues and trying to achieve a public good outcome. And therefore they should rather be called the chief value officer instead of a chief financial officer. In November 2019, the International Federation of Accountants agreed that this was better to call them chief value officers, and said they would support the integration of a value creation eco-reporting model around the world. Was one of the drivers for the collaboration of SASB and the GRI. The third thing which has happened is, before the pandemic arrived, we had economies which were in trouble. The South African economy was certainly on its knees. There were issues on the economy in Nigeria and other countries in the world. And then the virus arrived. Governments started regulating, such as lockdowns, which exacerbated depressed economies. And I, about 4 months ago, coined the word coronanomics, combining the two, so that directors understand there are two crises. There's an economic and a viral crisis. But in making business judgment calls for the long-term health of the company, because your duty is owed to the company, you've got to appreciate that the company is swimming in a sea of coronanomics. Short term, the board has to apply its collective mind to the survival of companies in the critical circumstances we find ourselves in. So it has to have an integrated, because integrated thinking is part, the revolutionary immensity of an integrated report is in the thinking. And integrated thinking is at the core of outcomes-based governance. Boards need to have integrated, collaborative, SDG 17, compromising mindsets with their stakeholders, and the stakeholders have to have a similar compromising mindset with companies to try and get companies in the next 18 months to 2 years to survive this coronanomics crisis. But they must never forget the elephant in the room, which is climate change. That cloud is gathering momentum above us. And at the same time, the board has to think long-term, because when economies get back into the mode of thriving instead of surviving, we have to be able to have a business model which is ready to start dealing with climate change, the increase of temperatures by 2-3 degrees centigrade. It won't help us to wear masks or to isolate or any of the remedies suggested to avoid the virus. None of those will help. We will be absolutely embraced by this climate change. And the fourth thing is that the last bastion of the primacy of the shareholder, America, in the last half of 2019, the Business Roundtable of America, representing its top 100 companies, said that directors must no longer just think of the primacy of the shareholder. They must act in the interests of all the stakeholders. Well, writers have now said and are talking about shareholder capitalism, this primacy of the shareholder, the financial capital model, which has been universally now rejected. And the model of learning and understanding the needs, interests, and expectations of your stakeholders, but always making a decision in the best interest of the health of the company, because your duties of good faith, care, skill, and diligence are owed to the company and not to the stakeholders. But you have to take account of their needs, interests, and expectations, and now their hardships during this coronanomics crisis. But unfortunately, writers, academics are starting to call this new era stakeholder capitalism. Well, boards cannot achieve the interests of all the stakeholders. In making decisions in the best interest of the company, there'll always be trade-offs between the various stakeholders. For example, if a company is moving from a combustion-driven set of plant and machinery and replacing it with renewables, money is needed. So the board, in thinking of the long-term health of the company, which if they get that decision right is in the best long-term interest of all its stakeholders, makes the decision that for 3 years, no dividends to shareholders. So they've got the extra cash and don't have to disturb the debt equity ratio of the company. Use that cash to replace it with renewables. Well, one would think the share price would go down. Well, some companies have done this. Their share price in some European stock exchanges have gone up. And some of the great asset managers of the world have said, here's a board that has applied its collective mind to the long-term health of the company. And consequently, that's what has to happen. And the phrase stakeholder capitalism, unfortunately, seems to indicate that boards now have to act in the interests of stakeholders. It's not so. Take account of their needs, interests, and expectations in our hardships, but still make that decision in the best long-term interests of the company. The first one was exclusive capitalism, focusing only on the shareholder. The era we're now in is inclusive capitalism, and it is a much better phrase than stakeholder capitalism. So I think those 4 items which I've mentioned illustrates the dynamism of corporate governance. And those 4 items is sufficient for Fabian and I to write another book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor King. Thank you for your very insightful words. Something that I really took from it was having the perspective of where outcomes-based governance really came from, knowing that it's not just in boardrooms, but that it's actually in governance generally, governance of economies, governance of nations, and also knowing that corporate governance is so dynamic that boards can never be comfortable with just the basic principles or new principles because they are always developing principles. So thank you very much for that. And I think many more other trends are discussed in the book. So now I'll also call on Professor Ajoku just to also share his few points with us, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chinonye and Professor King. We have a very good highlight, like you said, possibly a new project. Look at there's so many issues to deal with on the subject of corporate governance. Like I said earlier on, this is like no other book presentation that to see. And so I will be, first of all, you all for indulging us in this invitation. We postponed this from May 7th in Johannesburg and May 14th in Lagos to this virtual platform, thanks to COVID that has reordered the way that we do things. There are 174 persons on this call, and I will find any window that doesn't disrupt the program to just mention you and thank you when we get to that end. So the common thread that you will see in the book that we can tell you is outcomes-centric approach to governance. And I'm delighted that it's going the way we incorporate. It's migrated over the years from telling people why we need to regulate behavior to especially those who are charged with the responsibility of overseeing affairs of the corporate entity, to compliance issues, to principles-based, and today the new discussion is outcomes-centric, as Professor King has rightly highlighted. So the big will be lessons and problems of investment returns, even in the middle of this pandemic, still on the burner. What this means is that will be cut, best practices corporate governance may be ignored, and could result in both ways, either profitability or losses and shareholder return. It is, for instance, the question of sustainability that makes us ask the question, we cut costs at all costs. So the very easy place that comes to mind for managers, especially in this pandemic, is to employee costs, to cut the cost there. But looking at a broader framework, there's so many other things that we can change the way we live and expend and conserve resources and respect the environment, that we will still be able to ensure profitability and sustainability. So the debate has been highlighted as to who is really important. Just the shareholders, or is it the stakeholder, or is it the shareholder's strategy and his interest in the way his capital is put to use? Now, the issue of ranking of competing interests in corporate decisions remains an unresolved subject. What we've tried to do, Professor King and I, is to put this forward in the discussions that challenge big ideas on how corporates are run and reinvent some of the issues that have been put aside as to the behavior of those who entrust the companies to. This debate, by the way, was highlighted recently by Harvard professors Dean Payne and Suraj Srivasan in their 2009 article, A Guide to Big Ideas and Debate in Corporate Governance. Incidentally, we had looked at some of these debates, and I will now highlight some of the key governance trends, because we have a lot of boardroom gurus and C-level execs on this call. And by the way, I have a number of my Stanbic IBTC Holdings, ARM, Harrod Guinness, board colleagues, and a whole lot others on this call, including the Society for Corporate Governance board members. The first is corporate culture. Now, there's so much, only so much a board can do, but the board requires capable hands to carry its vision, and this is where corporate culture comes in place. Dealing with that corporate culture is what preserves the continuity of the enterprise. And this is one of the things we try to deal with extensively in the book. And I commend you to it. It ties into human capital and intangible asset development, which must be ensured on a continuous basis. My co-authors already shared some key points on what we call inclusive capitalism. It's inclusive because in this part of the world, we practice one of the most harshest form of capitalism. Elsewhere in the world, there's a recognition that you do need to look after those who do not have, if for anything, for self-preservation, so that there will be equality in the society, and then people will allow the wealthy ones to prosper and enjoy their prosperity. But in a lot of the emerging markets, it's totally ignored. So we want to ask that boards continue to look at capitalism in the way that boards are run. Permit me to add a few words about the role that businesses play in society, and the expectations about the role it should play has shifted dramatically. Businesses are now called to a higher purpose. It's one of sensing that externalities can only be ignored at their peril. And many businesses are increasingly open to the notion that they may have a responsibility for creating a more inclusive economy. And we see that. If you look at the adverts you see during this pandemic, it's one of empathy, it's one of being inclusive in the way that things are done. Now, we do have some flexibilities in the way that we're going to be conducting today's discussions. And I'm going to pause only for a moment and invite someone who is also taking this subject very seriously and in a place where it is well demanded. I'm going to be inviting not Mr. Akin Olusoji Akinyele, but Mr. Oscar Onyema, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Oscar did want to share a few words about the importance of the subject, Nigerian Stock Exchange, and the larger capital market. Oscar, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajogo, and let me also congratulate you and Professor King for this book that you've written, and also thank you for inviting me to participate in the discussions. I think that the topic of corporate governance is a very important one for us at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. We believe that what we are selling at the exchange is really integrity. Companies come and we do all kinds of due diligence and we give them that stamp of approval to be listed on our exchange. And when we do that, we're telling the investing public that these companies have met listing requirements and listing standards, and so they can participate. And so it's important that those companies live up to the integrity that is expected of them. And corporate governance, we believe, is one of the most efficient and developed ways to assure that integrity. And so your book on outcomes-based governance is a timely one, because we believe that for far too long, a lot of people have just taken the approach of checking the boxes. So if you can actually focus it on what is the outcome of what you're doing, and how can we continue to maintain that trust and that credibility, then that is great. If we look at our various indices, Premium Board, for example, you're required to have done the corporate governance rating system, and you're also required to have a proper sustainability program and sustainability reporting. If we look at the returns to our Premium Board as compared to the All-Share Index, it's always higher. Even in a down market where the All-Share Index is about 10%, Premium Board is down less than 1%. And it shows that investors appreciate this type of trust and integrity, and are willing to give very good market prices to these types of securities that adhere to high standards of corporate governance. So we appreciate what you're doing. It is a subject that is near and dear to our hearts, and we hope that a lot of institutions and individuals are going to read this book and imbibe some of the principles that you've espoused. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yema. We're delighted you're able to join us and share your thoughts. It's important to us that these principles are widely held by just not only the companies, but also those at the helm of affairs that determine listing requirements, prescribe good behavior, and are able to hold companies accountable to this high standard. Thank you very much, and we hope that you're able to carry through with the good work that is being done at the exchange. Thank you. I will now just revert to the point that I was making, and which was to say that we had in mind that yes, shareholders are one part of the economy, but indeed the stakeholders are the economy, and it's important to achieve that balance, as Professor King has mentioned earlier on. Now, we must then remember that business is about purpose, human purpose, be it returns to the shareholders, be it remuneration to the employees, be it return of capital to providers of capital, like lenders, creditors, or most importantly, as we very often forget, that every company, at least in Nigeria, is owned by Lord Caesar. Lord Caesar is the Federal Inland Revenue Service, owned 32%. And that is the holder of who takes 32% of every profit that is declared, and that is the sovereign. So it's important to this balance. Now, I talked about inclusive capitalism, but more importantly, the second thing to look at is risk governance, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And we're looking at risk now from a broad-based perspective, not just obvious fraud and so on, but then how do disruptions within the other related economies affect the sustenance of the enterprise? How would one new invention wipe away everything that you've built? And then, of course, now with many more idle, brilliant minds, cybercrime and terrorism is up, fraud on the internet. So how do companies prepare for this? The responsibilities of the board. And a whole lot of issues to do with blockchain technology and the OECD prescriptions in that regard are all carefully laid out in the book. It is a hope that the book, Outcomes-Based Governance, a modern approach to corporate governance, will rejuvenate the principles underlying corporate governance, and importantly, how its benefits can be achieved through decision-making, structural implementation. I just want to give a background to this. In our journeys, I call them missionary journeys 1, 2, 3, with the SEC code being drafted initially 2003 to different sectoral codes, and now today to the harmony in Nigeria of the national code. And then also with the King's Code 1, 2, 3, 4, which is principles-based and highly celebrated, by the way. We find one common thread running, which is that corporate governance keeps evolving. It's not something we now know. It's something that keeps evolving with the way businesses evolve and human behavior gets more sophisticated and technology is enabled in many places. I would like to thank one gentleman who's not here, Sim Shabalala, the Group Chief Executive of the Standard Bank Group, Africa's largest bank, for his thoughts and also for writing the foreword. I offer good appreciation to Professor King for the initial discussions that we had leading up to a conference in Lagos organized by the Society for Corporate Governance in Nigeria on the topic, very widely attended by CEOs in this part. That led up to the discussions of outcomes-based governance, which come past. I would like to thank all those who assisted with research, with the logistics and the brainstorming sessions that enabled the book. Oke Akwanya, who's on the call, Chinonye Naji, Dolapo Makinde, who midway through gathered enough knowledge and went off to Canada to do her master's, and Ruth Barnett, who is with Professor King. And of course, the publishers, Juta, very highly respected publishers in South Africa, who subjected our thoughts to peer review mechanism before accepting to publish the book. Now, I would be omitting something if I didn't mention the guidance of Ms. Kusum Kalian, formerly of the MTN South Africa Board, Standard Bank and South African Airways Board, and Ms. Lele Modise of MTN South Africa as well, for the presentation project guide. Initially, all the arrangements were made for the launch in Sandton and for Adeco Hotel over here, and all of that has changed. And they also provided insights into the virtual launch that we have now. The institutions that have been held, the Central Bank of the South African Reserve Bank, Securities and Exchange Commission, Financial Reporting Council, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, as well as the Nigerian Stock Exchange, particularly the Institute of Directors of South Africa, who granted us permission to use, make reference to parts of the code, which Professor King chaired, the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. All of this works, including the King 4 Code, whose chairman he is, and the National Code of Corporate Governance, whose chairman, Mr. M.K. Ahmad Owen, is also the president of the Society for Corporate Governance. All of this have been very helpful resource, analyzed in details in this work. I must thank Chinoye and Done Hurst of ACO for assisting with the plan, making sure that all the T's cross the I's dotted to get to this point. I would like to, at this point, raise a couple questions, and those questions you will find in the book, and I would maybe just ask the organizers, maybe Chinonye or Done, to highlight how this could be procured. This event is meant to be strictly respectful of time. We plan that it be an hour, and we would like to respect an hour, no more than plus or minus 10 minutes to it, and to then invite questions and remarks. So if it is fine, I would like to yield the floor to the one who conducts the questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Chinonye, I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you very much, Sir, for the words and also for the thanks to those who helped with bringing the book and making the book successful. We hope that everyone is enjoying themselves so far and learning things that are very insightful and that we can also translate into benefits for our businesses. And now, Uke and I will just go into the answer and question segments. We can see that there are already a few questions for the authors. Most of them relate to how the books can be purchased, and we'd address that immediately after the question and answer segment, and also send further information with our thank you emails. So just go that. So now I'll just take the first question, which I can see from Sadiq Adamu, which says, would your concept of inclusive capitalism advocate a revision of the existing limited liability structure to permit an extension of corporate liability for environmental or tortious claims beyond current limits? A more extensive shareholder liability regime could affect the pocketbooks and therefore likely to engender the kind of paradigm shift advocated by inclusive capitalism. Thank you very much for a very detailed question. So just throw the question to the authors to see if they have a few words on that.
Right. So I don't know, maybe Professor King, you want to take that?
I'm sorry, Professor King, you're muted.
Right, I'm unmuted now. The Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism was launched in London in 2012. I happened to have been privileged to be invited to that launch, which was launched by Lady Rothschild, together with Bill Clinton, Paul Polman of Unilever, Ratan Tata of Tata Group. And I was there in my capacity as chairman of the IRC and many other well-known corporate figures. And inclusive capitalism, notice, followed the GFC, the global financial crisis. And it was quite clear the financial capital model, focusing on equity capital, primacy of the shareholder, had failed. And instead of asking the question, how much money has the company made, without asking whether that profit had been subsidized by society and the environment, which many companies, it happened during the 20th century. That's why it was a century I label as unsustainable development. The question is now being asked, and it's embedded in inclusive capitalism. How has the company made its money? And how, in doing so, has it impacted on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development, namely the economy, the environment, and society? If it's been adverse to any of those three, take the environment, for example, then the company must adjust its business model and its strategy to try and eradicate or ameliorate those adverse impacts. If they've been positive, how are they going to enhance them in the future? Inclusive capitalism embraces a concept which is referred to radically as radical economic transformation. It actually sees that companies were formed by society, for society in the middle of the 19th century. We glibly say today that society is the licensor of the company. It was in fact created by society through its representative of the day, the UK government, and then the United States in Massachusetts. So it is part of society, and it's a critical member of the Nigerian society, the limited liability company. But it's there to create value to society. So at the end, when you're looking at this integrated approach, you ask holistically, has this company added value to society? Or has it had such an adverse impact on the environment that holistically, it's actually eroded value to society? So you look at it inclusively, but that inclusive model means that directors have to act in the best interest of this incapacitated person, the company, but take account of the needs, interests, and expectations and our hardships of the various stakeholders. In the nature of things, in making that decision in the best interest of the companies, you will benefit one stakeholder more than another, and there will be trade-offs. So the concept of acting in the best interest of stakeholders sort of engenders that the board must now start applying its mind to the interest of all the stakeholders. Now, if you do that, you're not acting in the best interest of the company. And when you do that, it follows invariably that you're going to benefit one stakeholder above another. And I gave you one example, stopping dividend flow for 3 years, prejudicial to the shareholder, but actually in the long-term best interest of the shareholder and all the stakeholders. So there will be trade-offs. And that's why inclusive capitalism is better language than stakeholder capitalism. But it doesn't change the basic principles that the duties of good faith, care, skill, and diligence is owed by the board to the company.
All right. Thank you, Professor King, for that very insightful answer. I don't know if Professor Ajogu has any additions to make to that, or I'll just take the next question.
I think we can take the next question.
All right. Okay, so I see a question from Bolanle Adejugbe, who says, are institutional investors relevant in this modern governance/outcomes governance? What active role can they play in upholding corporate governance? We'll just leave that to the authors to respond to.
Well, I think I can come in there. Institutional investors provide some sort of, could be a plus, could be a minus. In the past, we've witnessed docility in some of the institutional investors. And this docility, what it does is, whereas they've got a big voice, a big voting rights, by keeping quiet and just focusing on purely the returns, if they come, you find that companies lose a very vital check and balance that they have from those institutional investors. So yes, they've got a strong role to play, and better that they're played by those who are organized and have a stake in the company. Else, with the gap that we saw with the docility of some institutional investors, nature abhors the vacuum. Those gaps were then being filled by some shareholders associations, and some of them, by the way, are very well organized, and some others just coming and sometimes it's not as focused as it ought to be. So the answer is yes, it's got a major role to play, and with a focus on outcomes based, it calls on these institutional investors to pay more attention to the overall mandate and mission of the company. We can take one or two more questions, and maybe they should come in twos.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, sir. So we'll take another question. So there's a question from Ivan Asiri. Thank you for your question. Very few companies have a sustainability committee. Given the importance attached to sustainability and is reporting by Mr. King, should corporate governance codes mandate boards to have a sustainability committee?
Can you take that again, please?
All right, I'll just take that. So the question says, very few companies have a sustainability committee. Given the importance attached to sustainability and its reporting, should corporate governance codes mandate boards to have a sustainability committee?
Well, I'd let Professor take that.
All right,
that.
I'll deal with that. Companies can, of course, have a sustainability committee, but the ultimate decision maker, of course, is the board, because the board would have oversight over that committee. And the board should never rubber stamp a recommendation coming from a subcommittee. It has to interrogate it. Why? Because if it merely rubber stamps without applying its mind to it, and something goes wrong, the liability and responsibility is that of the directors, not the members of the subcommittee. It's the directors that have the responsibility. So whatever the sustainability committee does, it could inform the board and maybe help the board make a better decision to identify the critical sustainability issues pertinent to the business of the company. So let us assume the business of the company is the brewing of beer. The conservation of water is critical. And CSR, corporate social responsibility, is yesterday's thinking, as is CSI, social investment, because the conservation of water would now, on an integrated basis, be built into the very business model and strategy of the business of the company from an inclusive capitalist model. So yes, subcommittee, but final responsibility and oversight is that of the board.
We will take all the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor King and Professor Ajogu. I have a question from Mr. Sadiq Adamu, who says, would your concept of inclusive capitalism advocate the revision
No,
of...
we've taken that. We've taken that, I believe. Yes.
Oh, my apologies. My apologies. We then move on to the question from Professor Patutomi.
Okay, you're breaking up.
Who says, Professor Patutomi says, the FIRS may receive 32% from all, but government spends 10 times as much to ameliorate the externalities from company A versus B. How can we ensure vertical and horizontal equity in taxation?
I guess I can attend the Professor Tomi's question, and I know clearly where the question is coming from because he's been teaching for years the concept of specific use taxation. I think first and foremost is a recognition that there is necessarily a common good in a company represented by the sovereign, who takes 32% for giving birth to the company, so to speak. Now, and it is true, to provide then infrastructure and all the other things, there could be a lot of outflows from the government. But what this thing brings to mind is the importance of the Equator Principles and the importance of a balance between community and the pure interest of financial interest of just shareholders. In terms of providing a balance to those externalities is the reason why we advocate those sustainability principles, because they're bringing a tie between the core mission of the company, the recognition of community of purpose, recognition that there are other stakeholders, and all of these things ensure that companies are built to last. Without those principles, it might just be profits for a few years, and when anything changes, you find those companies crashing. So we did deal with it from the perspective of sustainability as part of the corporate culture, as part of the culture of the company. Thank you. Will there be any one or two more questions? Otherwise, whilst we're waiting to get those questions, we do have a senior citizen, an elderly citizen with us on the call, Mr. Pascal Dozier, CON, former chairman of MTN Nigeria. We offer you a warm welcome and greetings. There are not many 80s on this call. So we give you deep respect and greetings. If you do want to say anything, that would be fine. We would welcome your remarks. Thank you, Mr.
Hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. And it is my delight to see Professor King after a long time. Professor King, you are welcome, even though you are in South Africa. I think I'm intrigued by the introduction of in your book, the idea of the stakeholder and the shareholder value. It's quite intriguing. But I've been thinking through this since you've mentioned it. And the question I ask myself is, how does one really define the stakeholder for any organization? Who are the stakeholders? Because everybody, whether directly concerned or not, is either a positive beneficiary or a negative beneficiary to the action of any organization. Who is the stakeholder?
Well, I don't know. Professor King, you want to take that?
I'll take it with pleasure. It depends on the relationship between the company and that stakeholder. Many stakeholders are linked to the company by way of contract or linked to the company by way of legislation. So for example, there is, I'm sure, environmental legislation in Nigeria dealing with environmental issues. So society, of course, is a stakeholder. The biggest disruptor of companies today is civil society, not the activist shareholder. Go to an annual general meeting where you have Greenpeace. It's a whole different atmosphere from a shareholder activist, which usually asks questions only on the financial aspects of governance. But a Greenpeace shareholder will ask questions on the general well-being of the company, and it's much broader. So the relationship between the stakeholder and the company depends whether it's by contract, by legislation, or the very context or environment in which the company is operating. So the company will always have as its stakeholder the society in which it is operating and the environment, because depend how it impacts on the environment, whether positively or negatively. So society will react, and so the company will either be successful or not. The same thing is in regard to the supply chain. What is happening in a company's supply chain, a major company in Nigeria, will have maybe SMMEs, maybe small and medium-sized companies in the supply chain. But today, ESG audits are done as well as financial audits before and due diligences before capital is given by great asset owners and asset managers in the world today. So in the capital markets of the world, ESG due diligences are done at the same time as financial due diligences. And consequently, the importance of ESG issues and the importance of this collaboration, which I referred to between SASB, the American standard, and GRI, which is really the rest of the world standard. They come together, we're going to have one standard on sustainability issues, which is of great importance on the question of stakeholders.
Thank you.
All right, I think Done, you want to invite next
Yes.
quick contributor. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Mr. Jose. We're grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to invite a contribution of Mrs. Sholo David Borough, Head of Africa for Standard Bank Group. Is she on the call?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor King and Fabian, for a very insightful conversation. I really am looking forward to reading the book. You know, something that has always struck me is there is so much attention given to corporate governance for the private sector and private corporations who are focused on profit. And I really think that the lessons and principles and outcomes from, you know, all the research that has taken place needs to be applied to the public sector as well. Because ultimately it's about good governance. And I really think the outcomes-based approach is what will challenge both public sector and private sector to focus on all the stakeholders. Because the reality is that the public sector corporations who in many emerging markets, certainly in Nigeria and other parts of Africa, have a greater influence and impact on the society and the economy, really need a lot of support and capacity building in governance. So I guess my question is, how do we bridge the gap? How do we make sure that the capital, the resources that are in the hands of the public sector companies are also deployed to focus on all stakeholders, you know, the citizens of the country, many times who are meant to be the beneficiaries, you know, as well as other stakeholders. So I'll stop there, and I would really appreciate some kind of response to that. Thank you.
Fabian, I'm happy to respond to that.
Please,
if you have a look at King 4, you will see that we use generic words, organization and governing bodies. So we include in that state-owned enterprises. And we have supplements which are in the report. And one of the supplements is how King 4 is applicable to state-owned entities. So you're absolutely correct. This outcomes-based approach is equally applicable to state-owned entities as it is to private sector entities, and should be adopted by them. And citizens of Nigeria should be monitoring and auditing whether they are practicing good governance by asking whether they're achieving, they being the state-owned entities in Nigeria, are achieving these 4 outcomes. Are they actually creating value for citizens of Nigeria in a sustainable manner? That's that's one of the outcomes. And you go right through the outcomes equally with a state-owned entity, and you will find that as a chapter in King 4.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. David Bora, for that very insightful contribution. Let me just, as we say amongst lawyers, suo motu take this, because it's a question that has repeatedly been asked. So Prakash Kant from Olam, which is very big in agriculture, wonders whether the level of scrutiny that is placed in corporate doesn't place them at disadvantage as competing with the smaller companies that are not listed and do not have to report on the level of the bigger corporates. And I think the answer, and I do want to take this, is that I personally have often defined ownership negatively as a right to destroy. Anything you can destroy belongs to you. And you can test it out. You can smash your screen after this. Just wait until after the presentation. You can smash your screen and no one can do anything about it. That is a way to tell that you own it. But the minute you receive contributions from others, including capital, one of the things you lose is the ability to destroy without accounting the other co-owners, fractional owners. So with the bigger corporates, they're taking capital from other people, from private placements to public offerings, to second offerings. And in so doing, there are now several fragmented co-owners. And therefore, there has to be a balancing of the interests. So the accountability is even higher. This is the reason why listed entities, the stock market, because they've got the stakes of so many thousands of people, millions, they've got to hold themselves to a higher degree of reporting and accountability. That is also dealt with. I don't know if we have any more questions or interventions.
Professors, I'm gonna ask that we end the questions there because we are running out of time. I would just like to take a moment quickly to share my screen because a lot of the questions are asking how to download the book. So I'm going to share this document that's on my screen on how to download the book. Give me a minute. There we go. And we will also email this to everybody afterwards. But this just gives you, if you want to quickly take a look at this, and you can see how to download the book. And then I'd like to just thank everybody for attending and hand over to OK just to give a few closing remarks. Okay, can you give us some closing remarks?
Okay. Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. All right. Thank you, Done. And thank you also very much once again for taking time out to join us today. I think we can all agree that today has been a rewarding and enriching use of our time in the company of genius. We are grateful to the authors for giving us all a snapshot of the contents of the book and the thought process that went into writing it. We also thank you all for your very insightful questions to the authors. Working as a researcher on this a fantastic learning experience personally and gifted me with so many lessons, not just on outcomes-based governance and the ever-expanding trends of corporate governance, also on general work ethic and values. I thank the authors for this experience and opportunity. I urge you all to take advantage of this book and purchase as many copies as you can. As I said in my introductory remarks, every category of reader will find it extremely useful, from the CEO to the lecturer, the student, and the government regulator. Now, I'd like to thank especially, and first of all, the authors, Professors King and Ajogu once again, without whose hard work today's event would not have been possible or even necessary. I would also like to thank the event organizer and my co-moderator for their tireless work in making this event, I dare say, a success. I thank you all who have made time out, despite other competing demands on your time, to honor us with your presence on this virtual book launch. From the learned justices of courts to the distinguished members of the Inner Bar and Learning Council, to the captains of industry, our dear colleagues and all our friends across Nigeria, South Africa, and dialing in from all over the world, I say a very big thank you. And as we all log out, I wish us all a very pleasant rest of the day and leave you all with my very best wishes, as well as those authors and organizers. And I hope that next book, we will all be able to celebrate in the physical company of one another, having overcome the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you all and have a very good evening.
All right, thank you, Boke. Just before we leave, and I urge those still present to indulge Professor King and I just a few minutes to do one or two things. As members of the Inner Bar from our respective countries, it is proper for us to just mention a couple of our colleagues who have rallied support on this call. Chief Felix Pagogwe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Didi Dodo, SEN, Professor Koing Ajayi, in no particular order, and I crave indulgence. Professor Koing Ajayi, SEN, Mr. Mike Ibokwe, Ms. Mia SEN, Mr. Silva Guemo, SEN, OIT, SEN, Chief Emeka Ngige, SEN, Chris SEN, Samono SEN, Mr. JT Nodum, SEN, and a host of other senior advocates of Nigeria and our board colleagues. If you just will indulge me, Abiodun Owonikoko SAN, Abiodun Aina, Adobe Niegboma, Bayo Adenipeko SAN, Adiola Adeniyi Falaye Akinkumi, with immediate past Director of Legal Services of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Dewi Alex Moka of the MBA Lagos, Mrs. Amina Oyagbola, fellow and leader of the Aliwa West Africa. We also have Milord Justice Aneke, sincere appreciation, also for Otumba Ogbeleyi, all of my MBA 3 class colleagues, Bolaji Adeoye Adejugbe, Cecilia Maduekwe, and the consultant and good brother of mine, Dr. Chamberlain Anuzo Ajogu, Charles Wabulu, Chidube Mezilo. I've also mentioned Chief Ngige much earlier. Chijo Keagu from the Enugu State Government, Chike Kweme. I've got Chinasa, Ukwocha, Chinedu Ebo, Chinemo Nova Novare Group, Chinyere Akachuku as well. Mordi, Society for Corporate Governance and CLDS, Chuku Devemba. We've got Claire Masher from the Society for Corporate Governance and JNCI. Then the Dr. Demola Shogunle is the Group Chief Executive of Stanbic IBTC Holdings, Dezenga. Dayo Akindigbe from the Body of Senior Advocates of Nigeria, Daniel Olika, Dolakwo from Canada, Dr. Obioma Chike Okeyi, Ebaide, Egoare Longe was at the Pension Operators Association of Nigeria, Elizabeth King as well, Emmanuel Achukwu SAN, the Dean of the Lagos Business School, Professor Enase Okonedo, Mr. Ernest Wapa, formerly of the Local Content Development Board, Jolini Okorodudu from UBS, Switzerland, grateful, Eunice Alasa, pension Chief Fago SAN, who's a leader at the Body of Senior Advocates Committees, Felix Ofulwe, thank you very much, Fumilaya Deborah, Musha Kere, and the other colleagues from Stanbic IBTC nominees and asset management, Gandhi Badella, former CEO of Saab Green Tech, Emeka Nubia, Hein, CEO of Novare, Nigeria Hein Duplessis, the CEO of Society for Corporate Governance, Gilda Unko, the very respected artist, CEO of an engineering construction firm, Ibikunle Dashor, Ibrahim Mohammed, Ifeanyi Omeke, Zenith Bank, Ifeoma Douglas, Ifeoma Uta, Nigeria, Ifunanya, and so many others. I would like to thank you for your presence and to appreciate your being here on the call. Time will not permit me to go through the rest. We're most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this event. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Professor King, and thank you, Professor Jagwu. If anybody needs to contact us with regard to how to download the book, please feel free. Otherwise, we will be emailing you a set of the question and answers, as well as how to download the book. Thank you all very much for your attendance.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Done. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Fabian.
Thanks
Thank you, researchers.
Thank you, Professor King. Thank you, Professor Aju. Thank you, Donny.
Thank you for your work, and I think the evidence of your good work is in the many references in the book. The book is very well referenced. Thank you very much to the researchers.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fabian.
Thank you. Bye, Prof.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Donna, for hosting. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.